Hi there, my name is Amanda, and today's video is going to be my Pan Those Eyeshadows update. If this is the first video that you're seeing from me, I will link my Pan Those Eyeshadows playlist up above and down below so that you can catch up with my progress before we jump into this video. So I do have one update that I need to mention very quickly, and it's just a little change to this project. So I finally decided that I am going to attempt to pan my Soft Glam palette, and I filmed my introduction video, which I will also link up above and down below, so that if you're interested in seeing the introduction, you can check it out there. So because I'm always going to be focusing on that palette, I decided it would be best if I focused on 5 shadows within this project instead of 6. I think it's just going to make both projects a little more manageable for me, and I want to have success with both, so I'm just tweaking this project just a little bit. So with that being said, I'm going to go, as always, from the least amount of uses to the most amount of uses in each shadow. So the first shadow that I want to talk about comes from my Tarte Tartlet in Bloom palette, and it is the shade Rocker that I rolled in last month. So I will put a picture up of where it was before and with this reflective packaging, and this is where it is today. So you can see it here. I only used this shade twice this past month. I was really focusing on some of my other shadows this past month, so it kind of took a back seat. I think as the project continues, I'll reach into it more, but this is just like a comfort palette. If I don't know what I want to do, then I reach into this, and I've been feeling a little more creative this past month, so just haven't reached into this yet. I think it'll get more use over the next month. The next shade that I want to talk about comes from the Urban Decay Naked 2 palette, and the shade that I was working on was Chopper. So I will put a picture up of where it was before, and this is where it is today. So you can see a little pan at the top of the shade, and I did use this shade 3 times this past month for a total of 15 times within the project. And I definitely think that the brush that I was using and the technique I was using for this shadow definitely helped hit pan quickly. I also feel like this formula is not the same as my other Urban Decay eyeshadows that I have. This is the only one of the original Naked palettes that I have. I don't know how much I like this formula. I'm not going to be decluttering it anytime soon, but I do hope that I get to roll in maybe one of these cooler tone shades sooner than later, so that I can get a better feel of this palette and the formula in it. The next palette that I would have been talking about would have been the ABH Soft Glam palette. Since I do track my numbers within this project, I will give a little spoiler that I did hit pan in 2 shades within this palette, but I'm not going to show you what they are. You're going to have to check out my Pan That Palette introduction to see what shades I hit pan in and what this palette currently looks like. The next shade that I want to talk about comes from my ABH Sultry palette, and the shade that I am working on is Bloom. So I will put a picture up of where it was before, and this is where it is today. So again, you probably can't even tell that I have even used it at all, but I did use this shade 5 times on my eyes this past month, for a total of 11 times on my eyes within the project. Something that I haven't really thought about before until yesterday. I put a poll on my Instagram asking, so if I use this on my eyes and on my cheeks, does it count as 1 use or does it count as 2? And the majority of people voted that it does count as 2 uses, and I've never done that within this project before. I've never counted using it as a blush as 2 uses, and I kind of think I should be doing that. This shade I usually use on my cheeks, usually the pink matte shades that I'm working on. I do tend to use them as blushes because I just enjoy a monochromatic look. So technically, if we're counting my uses with this also as a blush, I've used this shade a total of 21 times within the project. So because I'm going to count my blush uses towards my 15 use goal, I'm going to go ahead and roll this out. I'm hoping that this palette will be rolled in again sooner than later again, just because this is a good color story for fall. I'm glad I got more use out of the Bloom shade because it's one of my least used within this palette, and I grew to love it. The reason it doesn't look like it is so used is because I use a fluffy brush with it, and I really love how it looks blended out and blown out. So if I roll this palette again in the future, I think I'll still get some use out of Bloom. The next shade that I want to talk about comes from my e.l.f. Bite-Sized palette, and I'm working on the first matte shade. So I will put a picture up of where it was before, and this is where it is today. So you can see some usage in there. There is no dip in this shade yet. It's funny because you can see the dips in the shimmer shades, but not in the shade that I'm actually working on. So I did use this shade 6 times this past month for a total of 10 times within the project. And every time I use this palette, I use every single shade and I create the same look. So it's funny to see how the usage just looks different on each shade. It just kind of depends on where I put it and what techniques I'm using to put it on my lid. I thought after 10 uses this would look a little more loved. I'm curious to see how long it's going to take to hit pan in this, but I'm very excited to bring this into October and November. These are the kinds of shades that I want to use during those months, so very excited to keep this in. And then the last shade that I want to talk about comes from my ABH Norvina palette, and it is the shade Love. So I will put a picture up of where it was before, and this is where it is today. So again, you probably can't really tell a difference. And that's because I use it the same way that I use Bloom. I really like it blown out. I use a fluffy brush with it. And I also use this shade as a blush whenever I reach into it. So I've used it a total of 8 times on my eyes, but I've used it a total of 16 times if we count it as a blush, which I am going to do. I did enjoy using this shade. I actually used it quite a bit with my ABH Soft Glam palette. I liked how the pinks and purples in that palette paired with this pink. So because I want to keep things rolling within this project, I like to have my variety. I like to keep my palettes in rotation. I am going to go ahead and roll this out with the 16 uses. And I did hit one bonus pan this month, and it comes from my Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde palette. And I was using the shade Galaxy here. I really like this as a topper. For just something a little more pink, a little more sparkly, and I was definitely into like just wanting a little topper shade, wanting a little more sparkle in my looks this past month. So this was really fun to use, and I was also even mixing Cosmic a little bit, but I was definitely focusing on Galaxy. I'm usually not hitting bonus pans, so this was definitely fun to use. Alright, so number time. I hit pan in 4 shadows, and my total pans in my collection went from 38 to 41. I did declutter some eyeshadows. I also brought new eyeshadows into my collection. So because I decluttered one eyeshadow with a pan, and I also brought in 4 new eyeshadow pans, my pan percentage went from 13.1% last month to 14.1% this month. I'm so close to 15%, and I thought hitting 10% of my collection showing pan this year would be really cool. But 15%? That's crazy to me. I love that this project is giving me the ability to really love on my eyeshadows and just keep rotating through my collection, find ways to make things work. So I'm really enjoying this process, and I'm so happy that my collection is showing the love that it wasn't really showing before. Okay, so let's talk about the shades that I rolled into the project. I rolled in 3 new shades from 3 new palettes, and 2 of the palettes are brand new to my collection. So the first shadow comes from the BH Cosmetics Chillin' in Chicago palette, and this is a new palette from BH Cosmetics, and I've never tried their formula before. I was really impressed with the e.l.f. palette, and that is the only affordable palette in my collection besides ColourPop. I wanted to try another brand that I've heard really good things about that is affordable, and BH Cosmetics I've heard really good things about, but none of their palettes have really stood out to me except for this one. I was immediately drawn to it. So I'm gonna try not to blind you, but this is what it looks like, and it's really, if we're being honest, it's not really anything special, but I was definitely drawn to this bottom brow here. I really liked these pinks, and I like how the color story is laid out. It seems like it's more cohesive with each row, And of course you can mix and match, but I like that concept. The shade that I rolled into this project from this palette is probably the most fall appropriate shade in this palette, which is the shade Chi-Town here. And this shade kind of reminds me of the Naked Honey palette, those metallic golden shades. This one's very intense. This is the time of year that I will want to wear it. I'm very excited to have this shade rolled into the project right now. And the other shade that I rolled in came from the new Natasha Denona Glam palette. So Natasha Denona is definitely a brand that I have been interested in, but I've never wanted to invest $130 into a palette. And when she started coming out with these smaller palettes, I was definitely more interested, but none of the color stories really spoke to me where I would use every shade in it. And once this palette was released, I was immediately drawn to it. I've also heard really great reviews on this palette, so I did decide to pick it up and try it for myself. And the shade that I rolled into the project is one that I haven't used on my eyes yet, but it is this end shade here in Brow Bone. And it's just one of the lighter shimmer shades, so I think it'll definitely be easy for me to use, but I don't have a Natasha Denona palette in my collection, so I'm curious to see how long it's going to take to hit pan in these shadows. And then the last shade that I rolled into the project is not from a fall appropriate palette in my eyes. The ColourPop Blush Crush palette is rolled back into the project again. I still like the pink shades right now, so I hope that I will use this palette still, but the shade that I'm going to be focusing on is the top shade in Pop a Bottle, this top center shade in Pop a Bottle, and you can kind of see there's a dent in it already. I used it a lot when I was panning this shade in Meiji Blush. I used it a lot as a topper shade, and I think that's kind of the best way to wear it is as a topper. I've never paired it on top of like either of these shimmer shades, but maybe it'll work that way. And this is also kind of sheer. It's kind of a sheer shade, so definitely more like topper appropriate. So maybe I can use it as a topper in some of my shades within this project, or maybe even my soft glam palette. So this is my new color story for the month of October. So I definitely am getting fall vibes still. This shade is really hard to see, but it's definitely a topper shade. This pinkier shade from the Blush Crush palette, but besides that, like, I feel like these are very fall toned, and I definitely want to get use out of this metallic yellow shade. The last time that I had something like this within the project, I rolled it in. It was my very first shade that I rolled in when I started this project in December, and I hated using it during the winter months. So I definitely want to make sure this is not going in with me in December. I want to use it in October and November. And yeah, I don't really feel like I have goals with this. If I can probably hit pan in this shade if I just keep using it as a topper. I feel like it could possibly work with these shades, just because it's not so pink. But I don't know, I'm gonna have to play around and see what's gonna work. But my eye is definitely going to this shade, so I hope I get to play with it quite often this month. Alright, so that is my Pan Those Eyeshadows update. I hope you will consider subscribing before you go, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!